The great hall of the alien palace stood quiet as frost, tall spires of violet crystal humming softly around the throne. Guards in bone-white armor lined the walls without moving an inch, and every noble present kept their breath shallow as the King of Radari rose from his seat, his eyes burning like two stars about to collapse. His voice, cold and commanding, echoed across the chamber as he spoke the words no one expected to hear. "I offer my daughter, Princess Varen, to the humans, as a symbol of peace between our worlds," he said, and the silence cracked like glass. Gasps moved through the chamber like a wave. Noblewomen clutched their robes. Generals narrowed their eyes, and Varen herself did not move, her silver skin catching the light as if carved from moonlight. Her eyes fixed straight ahead, unreadable. Everyone in the galaxy knew the truth whispered behind every closed door of the palace. That Varen was born barren, that she could not produce an heir, that her genetics had failed her long before she could walk. A defect the king never forgave her for, a flaw he kept hidden behind layers of ceremony and silence. And now he was giving her away like a broken sword, like an empty promise, to a species many of the nobles still called primitive behind their smiles. The human delegation stood quietly in their corner, uncertain, their translator devices blinking slowly. Their leader, Ambassador Tile, stiffened slightly, unsure whether this was a trap or a true offer. And from behind the line of soldiers stepped a man not in uniform, but in a simple dark jacket. Tall, calm-eyed, unarguably curious Caleb. Aaron, xenobiologist, known across Earth's allied colonies as a mind that saw beyond skin and bone. Chosen to observe alien biology, not politics, and certainly not to marry a royal. He took one step forward, his voice quiet but firm. "If the princess agrees, I accept." And once again, the hall gasped as one. All eyes turned to Varen, whose expression did not change, not a twitch, not a blink, just silence as heavy as gravity. And then she spoke. "I agree," she said, her voice like cold water sliding over stone, and nothing more. The ceremony was done before the nobles could react, before the ambassadors could object, before anyone could truly understand what had just happened. The king turned and walked away, robes trailing behind him like shadows, leaving his daughter in the care of a human he barely glanced at. Whispers spread through the stars within hours, stories blooming like wildfire across networks and secret channels. The king had given away his only daughter, and not to a warrior or ruler, but to a human scientist, and worse, one who might one day father a child she was not supposed to be able to have. Inside her new chambers, Varen stood before the wide crystal windows, staring out into the twin moons of Radari, her hands folded, her face calm, but inside her heart, something she had long buried began to stir like an ember finding air. She remembered the whisper her mother had given her years ago before she vanished, a secret sealed in her blood, a warning and a hope, that her body was not broken, only locked, and the key was not of this world. Caleb entered the chamber slowly, respectful, unsure what to say, unsure what this meant for either of them, and yet drawn to her not by duty, but by the quiet mystery she held like a cloak. "I didn't expect this," he said gently, and Varen turned to him, her eyes searching. "Neither did I," she replied, then paused, her voice softer now. "But you are not like the others, and I am not what they believe I am." Caleb sat across from her, the silence between them thick but not uncomfortable, like the beginning of something unknown. And he began to ask her questions, not about politics or royalty, but about her biology, her past, her memory, and her blood. She answered some, ignored others, and then asked him her own. Why did you accept me, knowing what I am called? He hesitated, then smiled faintly. Because I don't believe in labels, only in patterns. And your pattern doesn't match what they say. That night, as Viren lay on the edge of her new chamber, sleep slipping over her like a wave, a warmth began to grow in her stomach. Not pain, not sickness, but something ancient and quiet, like a voice humming from deep within her cells. Caleb, back in his lab quarters, stared at the scans he took during their brief contact, confused by a reaction he couldn't explain. A soft chemical bloom where there should have been nothing, like a locked engine suddenly humming to life, in the shadows of the throne room. The king stood before a sealed vault, staring at a dusty tablet etched with symbols older than the empire itself, his fingers trembling not with fear but rage, because deep down he knew this day might come, the day her blood would awaken, and it would not be him who controlled it. Outside, stars blinked like watching eyes, and deep beneath the palace, in a chamber sealed for centuries, a soft pulse lit up a forgotten console, as if responding to something that had just begun. The trade no one expected had been made, but what it truly cost, no one yet understood, not even the king, not even Viren, not even the human now tied to her by law and fate. And somewhere in the silence of space, the prophecy whispered by long-dead queens began to rise once more, carried by winds that never truly die, waiting for the heir that should never have existed, waiting for the bloodline that was never meant to awaken, waiting for the human who had already taken the first step into history without even knowing it. The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. The palace halls still held their silence like a blade drawn too long. And though Viren walked beside the human now called her husband, not a single noble bowed, not a single priest offered blessing. Only cold eyes followed her steps. Only the weight of expectation pressed against her back like chains made of silence. She did not flinch, not once. Not when they passed the ancient garden where her childhood was buried. Not when the royal guards whispered just loud enough for Caleb to hear them mock her name. Not when her own cousin turned her face away as they passed through the upper halls. Caleb noticed everything, not with words but with the stillness in his posture, the way he scanned every corridor with thoughtful eyes, the way he spoke to Viren in private with calm care, never pushing, only offering, and each night he returned to his small lab hidden beneath the guest wing, where his screens glowed with questions no one in the galaxy had dared ask before. He had taken samples, just the smallest traces from the touch of her hand, the heat of her skin, the air around her breath, and what he saw made no sense. Genetic markers that should have been dormant, sparked like live wires. Traces of reactive cells responding not just to his presence, but to his specific biology, as if something inside her had waited for a match, waited for him. Viren said nothing of the warmth that had started to build in her stomach, not pain, not illness, just heat, rising in the night like fire curling beneath her ribs, pulsing softly as if something deep in her blood had remembered how to sing. And though her face showed no fear, her hands trembled behind closed doors when no one could see, she began to dream, not in images but in echoes, the sound of a woman's voice calling her name in a language lost to the royal archives, a language only her mother once whispered in secret before she vanished without a trace. And in those dreams the stars bent in strange ways, and her body was surrounded by light not her own. Caleb noticed her silence changing, not the words she spoke, but the ones she didn't. And one night he brought her a question wrapped in kindness. Not force, not demand, just curiosity wrapped in trust. What if your condition was never a flaw? He asked softly. What if someone wanted you to believe it was? She looked at him then, truly looked, and for a moment the mask cracked just enough for something real to shine through, not sadness, not anger, but hunger, the hunger to know the truth buried in the dark corners of her bloodline. Together they began to dig through ancient archives written in layered tongues, through encrypted royal records sealed before her birth, through digital tombs left untouched by time and fear. And what they found was a single word repeated like a warning and a promise: Arioka, the old name for the bloodline of the Moonburn Queens. A lineage said to hold power that could twist fate, alter stars, create heirs that could unite galaxies or tear them apart. And at the center of every tale, every myth, every broken truth, was a woman who carried a child she was never meant to bear. That night, Caleb activated a gene-mapping interface never used in alien biology before, and Viren stood still as the soft blue light scanned her frame, each flicker of the machine confirming what the record suggested, that her DNA had been tampered with, locked by surgical gene blockers placed before she had ever spoken her first word. And worse, those blockers were human in design. Someone had hidden her gift, not to save her, but to erase a future that someone feared would come true. Caleb's hands shook as he pulled up the analysis, his own genetic sequence now intertwined in the results. And what he saw stopped his breath mid-motion, a resonance between their genes. Not forced, not manipulated, but natural, rare, impossible, a match that only occurred once in 1,000 bloodlines. He looked at her then, his voice a whisper. You were never barren, Viren. You were caged. And someone knew I was the key. She didn't speak for a long time. Her eyes locked on the glowing scan hovering between them, her mind racing through years of silence, pain, exile in her own home, and the bitter truth that her father had chosen to bury what he could not control. Far above them, the king sat in his private chamber, staring at the same results through a hacked data stream, his eyes full of fury, not surprise, because deep down he had always feared this would happen, that her blood would awaken in the presence of a human, that the old prophecy would begin to write itself again. He called for his shadow advisor, a figure who moved like smoke and never spoke without permission. And he gave the order without blinking: isolate her. Contain the human. Do not let the people learn of this until I decide what to do. Guards began to move in the hallways, silent and quick, cloaked in law but driven by panic, and Viren felt it before she saw it, the way the air shifted, the sudden stillness outside their door, the sound of weapons being drawn without cause. She grabbed Caleb's arm, whispered only one word: run, and the wall behind them split open, revealing an escape tunnel no one else had ever seen. She had prepared this for years, not for war or rebellion, but for truth, for the day someone might finally believe her. And as they fled into the dark passage, the palace roared above them with alarms and shouted orders. Far beneath the palace floor, the tunnel opened into an ancient chamber untouched by centuries. And as they stepped inside, lights flared awake on their own, reacting to her presence. Her blood, her heartbeat, symbols lit up along the walls, old Radari glyphs that spoke of stars, of bloodlines, of the heir of two worlds. And as Caleb turned to her with wide eyes, Viren placed a hand on her stomach, where the heat now burned steady and strong. She looked up at him, her voice shaking for the first time. There's something growing inside me, Caleb, and it knows your name. The silence in the high chamber cracked as the king slammed his palm against the old command stone. The crystal beneath his hand flared red like a wound freshly torn. Lights flickered across the walls as Forbidden's data poured into the air. He stared at the glowing strands of code revealing what he had long feared. The moment had come, the moment he had buried beneath generations of lies. It was rising through her blood like fire through ice. The princess was changing. The signs were clear. The markers in her body had awakened, not through accident or time, but through the presence of the human. Caleb Aaron. His cursed DNA had aligned with hers in a way that should have never been possible. A resonance not seen since the time of the Moonblood Queens. A pattern that carried the power to bend the laws of nature itself. The king's eyes burned with fury as he turned toward his shadow guard, a cloaked figure who had served him since the early wars, silent and invisible. The king's voice trembled with rage as he spoke. She carries something inside her, something that should have never returned. She must be contained and the human removed. Before the court learns the truth, before the people see the signs, before the old blood rises again. Orders moved faster than light. Encrypted signals shot through the palace corridors. Silent agents changed their routes. Guards replaced with loyalists trained to obey without question. The princess was now a threat, not because of what she had done, but because of what she might become in her chambers. Viren sat still beneath the starlight pouring through the crystal ceiling, her hand resting softly against her stomach. The warmth inside her had not faded, it had deepened, pulsing now like a second heartbeat, steady and strong, not painful. Not wrong, just different, just alive. Caleb entered without knocking, his eyes dark with worry. The small device in his hand flickered with readings too complex to explain in simple words. But his face told her everything. The scan was complete. The answer undeniable: she was pregnant. And the child growing inside her was not just a miracle. It was a spark of something ancient and powerful, something forgotten by time and feared. By kings, you need to leave with me, Caleb said quietly. Not as a plea, not as a demand, but as a truth dressed in urgency. They will come for you. For the child, they will not let you carry it to term. Viren nodded once, already prepared, already knowing, her instincts sharpened by years of surviving. Behind masks, her voice calm as she stood. The passage under the Star Garden is still unsealed. We can reach the outer wing from there. My mother once told me to remember it, in case the crown ever turned against its own blood. They moved quickly, silent through the back corridors carved from crystal and light, footsteps muffled by the soft pulse of ancient energy flowing beneath the floors. They passed old statues of queens long erased from records, queens who once ruled with wisdom, not war, who bore children not for alliances but for destiny. Behind them, alarms began to rise, soft at first like whispers, then louder like distant thunder. The guards were moving, the seal on their door broken, but by then they were already beyond reach, already slipping into the roots of the palace where even the king's voice could not follow. The Star Garden loomed ahead, overgrown with plants that shimmered like stars trapped in vines. And beneath the largest tree lay a stone arch half buried in moss. Viren pressed her hand to the old rune, and the path opened with a deep groan, revealing stairs, carved in spiral lines descending into darkness. They did not hesitate. They stepped into the depths together, the passage sealing behind them with a soft hiss, leaving only silence above, and the sound of pursuit drawing ever closer. Inside the passage, torches flared to life on their own. Sensing the bloodline they were meant to protect, Caleb looked around in awe. Ancient glyphs danced on the walls, stories told in symbols. Stories of a time when Radari queens could speak to the stars, when their children held voices that echoed across dimensions. And at the heart of those stories was a single warning etched in glowing gold. When blood of moon and earth align, the air shall shape the stars or shatter them. Viren touched the wall softly. Her fingers trembling for the first time, she turned to Caleb, her voice barely a breath. They feared her power, so they sealed it in me. And now it's waking. Because of you. Because of what we are, outside, in the throne hall. The king's voice roared like fire unleashed. His advisors kneeled trembling as he tore through reports and surveillance. His face twisted in disbelief and fury. The princess had vanished. The human with her, and the scans confirmed what he had tried to deny. What the bloodline could no longer hide. She is with child, the medic confirmed, voice shaking. And the energy signature matches the Forbidden's pattern. It is an heir unlike any born in our time, a fusion of human and royal blood. The ancient line has returned. The king stood in silence, breathing hard, memories crashing down like broken waves, memories of his wife whispering the prophecy he tried to forget. The night she vanished with only a single message left behind. Protect the child that comes not by crown, but by truth. He had buried that message, denied it, crushed all who dared speak of it. But now the truth had bloomed in his own daughter's womb, and the legacy he tried to erase had risen in the hands of a human. He turned toward his fleet commander, his voice sharper than steel. Mobilize the hunters, deploy the shadows. Lock down every exit from the city. I want them found before the suns rise again. The child must not be born, not under my rule, not while I breathe. But deep in the old tunnels, Caleb and Viren reached a hidden chamber pulsing with soft blue light. Machines hummed gently as if waking from sleep, and in the center of the room stood a cradle of energy, ancient and untouched, shaped not by hands but by will. Waiting for something lost to return, Viren stepped forward, drawn by a force she did not understand, and the cradle responded, sending waves of warmth through her body, her skin glowing softly, her breath slowing. And the child inside her kicked for the first time, strong, real, aware. Caleb caught her as she staggered, holding her close, and in her eyes he saw something new, something ancient, something terrifying and beautiful all at once. The child knows, she whispered, her voice unsteady. It feels the danger. It feels the blood calling. It is not just ours. It belongs to the stars. And far above them, the king stared out across his empire, unaware that the fate he feared most had already begun, not in war or fire, but in the quiet heartbeat of a child who would change everything. The walls of the hidden chamber hummed with a rhythm older than the palace itself. Faint blue light pulsed through the ancient panels, as if reacting to the very blood running in Viren's veins. The air felt thick with memory. Every breath they took stirred dust that hadn't moved in generations. And Caleb stood silent as he watched her move toward the cradle of energy that responded only to her touch. She looked fragile beneath the glowing light, but there was something in her now. Something fierce and wild and undeniable. Her fingers hovered above the controls, carved into the base of the chamber, symbols glowing as they sensed her presence. Not a code, not a password, but a recognition of legacy, one the world above had buried beneath fear. Caleb held the scanner tighter in his hand, watching the child's vitals surge in response to the energy around them, the heartbeat inside. Viren was no longer faint or uncertain. It was strong, echoing through the readings with a force that shouldn't belong to an unborn life. Yet there it was, undeniable and steady like a drum from another world. This place, Viren whispered as her eyes scanned the symbols. It belonged to the Moonblood Queens before the crown became a cage, before the kings erased them from history. Her voice trembled not with fear but with fury. Her hand rested on the curved edge of the glowing cradle, and it pulsed back, warm and alive. "My mother brought me here once," she said quietly. "Just once, when I was too young to understand. She told me if I ever felt something burning inside me that couldn't be explained, I should return, that this place would remember what the world chose to forget." Caleb moved closer, watching the walls shift and unfold. Panels opening like petals, revealing data streams and holograms of figures dressed in armor woven with light. They stood tall with crowns that shimmered like stardust, their eyes calm, their faces carved with strength and sorrow, and all of them were women. The cradle spoke then, not in sound but in feeling, a low vibration that reached through Vyrine's spine and into her chest. Her breath hitched as visions flashed through her mind. A woman with silver hair standing before a crowd of kneeling soldiers. A child with glowing eyes laughing under twin moons. A war that tore empires apart not with weapons, but with prophecy. Caleb caught her before she collapsed, his arms steady as he held her upright, his voice low and careful. "What did you see?" he asked. And Varen opened her eyes slowly, her gaze no longer calm but blazing with truth. "They lied about everything," she said. "About the curse, about the bloodline, about what I carry. They were never afraid of weakness. They were afraid of power they could not control. Above them, the king's forces swarmed the upper chambers of the palace. Guards marched through corridors with scanners and orders to kill if resistance was found. The royal court was locked down, and whispers began to spread, not just among the nobles but among the servants, the guards, the people who had watched Vyrene grow from a quiet child into a silenced ghost. Some began to remember her mother, the queen who vanished without a body, without a funeral. Only rumors and a warning that the king had sealed something away beneath the palace. Something sacred, something dangerous. In the skies above, allied empires began to take notice. A flurry of coded transmissions echoed across systems, old allies. Stirred from silence, ships moved from orbit into holding patterns. And one by one, voices that had once stayed quiet began to ask the question the king feared most. Where is the princess, and what is she carrying? In the secret chamber, Caleb found an old data core embedded in the wall. He slid his scanner into the port and watched as layers of encrypted files unraveled. These weren't just stories, they were records, medical data, historical edits, genetic archives of royal children whose existence had been wiped clean. And at the heart of it all was one project, hidden in red code, labeled only as Project Stillborn. His hands froze as the files opened, showing a list of names marked for genetic suppression. Princesses born with potential to reshape reality. Daughters who had been genetically silenced at birth to prevent their power from rising. And Vyrene's name sat at the bottom of the list. Marked as active, not failed, not broken, but delayed. She looked at the screen, eyes wide, her voice almost too soft to hear. They never expected a human match. They thought the old code would hold forever. But your presence broke it, not with technology, but with resonance. Your DNA woke what they buried. Before Caleb could answer, alarms began to blare through the lower corridors. The chamber's lights dimmed, sensors lit up with movement. A breach alert pulsed on the wall in flashing red. The king's forces had found the tunnel entrance. They were coming, and they were close. Vyrene reached into the core system, her hand glowing with energy now so strong it made the chamber tremble. Her blood had fully awakened, the genetic locks completely dissolved, and the child inside her kicked again, stronger than before, sensing the danger. Responding with awareness that was far beyond normal development, Caleb grabbed the core and secured it in a data crystal, slipping it into his satchel as the walls began to shift. "We have to go now," he said, and Viren nodded. Turning toward the exit tunnel that had just begun to collapse, stone and metal cracking under pressure from the incoming attack, they ran together, the old energy systems lighting their path in blue and silver, every step shaking the floor as the palace above began to awaken to the truth hidden beneath it. And with each heartbeat, Viren felt her connection to the child deepen, no longer just a mother, but a vessel for something greater. Something old enough to remember the stars before they burned. Behind them, the cradle chamber sealed itself. Once more, its lights fading into silence, its records buried once again, but not lost, not forgotten, not this time. As they reached the edge of the tunnel and emerged into the ancient garden behind the palace, Viren turned her gaze toward the sky where the twin moons watched in silence, and she whispered words her mother once taught her, words meant to awaken. "The stars themselves. The Heir has heard the call," she said, "and the stars will answer." The garden behind the palace had not been touched in decades. Vines had curled around statues of forgotten rulers. Silver petals drooped from crystal-stemmed flowers that pulsed with faint starlight. The place felt like a graveyard of truth. Silent and sacred, yet as Viren stepped into the moonlight, something ancient in the ground stirred beneath her feet. Like roots remembering the blood they once protected, Caleb followed close behind her, the data crystal clutched tight in his palm, his eyes scanning every shadow, every rustle of wind through leaves. The guards were not far behind. The tunnel had slowed them, but it would not hold them for long. And in Viren's body, the energy swelled again, stronger now, no longer a whisper but a voice, not in her mind, but in her very bones. They reached the far edge of the garden, where a half-buried starship lay under moss and memory. Its hull cracked, its wings torn, but its core still pulsing faintly. A relic from the first Moonblood Queen who fled the stars long ago. Viren reached for the door, and the ship responded not to her touch, but to her heartbeat. The panels slid open with a low sigh, and the lights inside blinked awake like tired eyes. Inside the ship, the air was stale but breathable. The systems flickered with uncertainty, as if unsure whether to serve or sleep. Caleb moved quickly, activating what controls he could, setting the engines to warm slowly, carefully, while Viren stood in the center of the old command deck, her hand resting on her stomach, the child within her pulsing with a rhythm that matched the ship's core. "It knows this place," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and dread. "It remembers even though it hasn't seen. It feels the metal, the dust, the memories carved into the hull. It is not just aware, it is awake." Caleb turned toward her, his voice low, serious. "The scans from the lab," he said, "they didn't just show accelerated development. The child's brain is growing at a speed I can't explain. Neurons forming patterns far beyond standard cognition, and there are moments, flashes, where your brainwave syncs with it, like you're sharing thoughts, dreams, even instincts." Viren nodded slowly, her fingers tightening against her gown. "I can feel it move when I'm angry. I can feel it calm when you're near. And when I close my eyes, I see things I've never lived. Memories that don't belong to me. Voices from stars I've never visited. It's like the child carries a piece of something older than either of us. Something woven into the void itself." A sudden tremor rocked the ship, distant at first, then sharper. The ground outside shuddered as blast charges detonated near the tunnel entrance. The guards were coming fast now, no longer cautious, no longer silent. Their orders had shifted from capture to eliminate, and the king was done waiting for diplomacy. The ship's engines groaned as they awoke from slumber. Power surging through the frame, shields weak but forming. Enough to protect for a short escape, not enough to survive a direct strike. Caleb checked the systems, searching for emergency lift protocols, while Viren sank to her knees, her breath heavy, her hands shaking. "The child," she said, voice strained. "It's not just reacting anymore. It's doing something. It's trying to speak through me. It wants to be born soon. Far too soon. I can feel the pressure building, the energy turning inward. It's not pain. It's like creation pulling itself into form, too fast, too fierce." Caleb rushed to her side, placing the scanner near her abdomen. Readings spiking wildly across the screen, not just life signs, but quantum-level fluctuations, the kind only seen around deep space anomalies and ancient starforges. The child was not just forming a body, it was forming a field, an aura, an echo of power that reached beyond biology. Outside, weapons fire echoed across the garden. The first line of guards storming the path, their armor glinting under the moons. But as they neared the ship, the air around the hull shimmered, distorted like heat over fire, and when the first shot was fired, it bent midair, curved away, and vanished into the dark. The guards froze, stunned, and one whispered what others feared to say. "It's protected by something we cannot see," Viren stood slowly, the glow around her skin no longer subtle, her hair floating slightly as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist. The child inside her sent another wave of energy outward, a pulse that rippled through the walls of the ship, and in that moment, every plant in the garden bloomed at once, every flower opened, every vine straightened, and the entire space lit up like a sea of living stars. The guards fell back, some in fear, others in awe, unsure whether they faced a weapon or a miracle. And the king, watching through a live feed from the royal tower, clenched his fists until blood ran between his fingers. "End it," he snarled. "End it now. Destroy the ship. Destroy them both." Before the child takes its first breath, orbital weapons activated. Ancient cannons positioned in the palace's highest towers, charged to strike the ship with a focused beam strong enough to melt stone. The countdown began, 10 seconds to fire, 9, 8. Caleb activated the manual override. The ship's engine screamed with defiance as old metal burned with new light, and Viren closed her eyes, reached inward toward the child, not with fear, but with trust, with connection, with the quiet strength that had always burned within her blood. She whispered to the child not in words, but in emotion, in memory, in the love of a mother not yet fully formed, and in response, the ship's core flared with golden fire, a bubble of pure light expanding outward in every direction. The beam from the palace tower struck just as the light reached its peak, and instead of fire and ruin, there was silence, complete and total, a moment frozen in time where even gravity seemed to hold its breath. Then the light vanished, the ship gone, the garden still, the guards stunned, and the king screaming into the void, demanding answers no one could give. Because the child that should not exist had just rewritten the rules, not with violence, not with war, but with the simple power of being born, high above the world, in the outer orbit of Radari. The ship reappeared, gently hovering in silence, cloaked in energy the universe had not seen in centuries, and inside it, Caleb held Viren's hand as she breathed through the first signs of labor, her strength unwavering, her eyes glowing like a queen of old. "The child is ready," she said, her voice calm, "and the stars will have to choose what they truly fear, chaos or change." The ship drifted high above Radari, wrapped in a golden glow that flickered like flame caught between space and time. Inside the old vessel built by hands now long turned to dust, the air pulsed with soft vibrations, not from engines or systems, but from the unborn child stirring inside Viren, each pulse stronger than the last, each one shaking the walls as if the metal itself could feel the birth of something impossible. Caleb moved quickly, securing the last of the medical systems still functional, his hands steady despite the tension rising in the room. Every screen around him blinked with warnings. The child's growth rate was far beyond anything recorded in any species, neural patterns already formed, organ systems shifting into perfect alignment. It was not just birth, it was emergence, and time itself felt like it was bending under the pressure. Viren lay back on the reclined seat, now converted into a medbed, her breathing shallow but controlled, her fingers clutched tightly around the armrest, her skin glowing softly under the overhead lights, every muscle in her body vibrating as the force within her built toward something final, something complete, something sacred. "I can feel its thoughts," she whispered, her voice hoarse and distant. Not words, not language, but feeling, awareness, like it's already watching the world from behind my eyes. "It knows who I am. It knows who you are. It knows what we're running from." Caleb leaned close, his voice calm but intense. "We're almost ready. The ship can hold the energy for a few minutes longer. Enough for you to deliver safely. But once the child comes, the energy release might overload the core. We have to be ready to move or escape if we can." Viren nodded slowly, her other hand pressed against her stomach, where the pulsing light now radiated outward in waves, and as the moments passed, the pressure grew like a storm tightening around its center, and her back arched as the first true wave of force surged through her body. Not pain, not fire, but power, raw and primal and uncontainable. Below them, on the surface of Radari, chaos reigned across the palace and beyond. The royal tower burned with failed power surges as the orbital strike systems overloaded and shattered. Guards scrambled through damaged corridors trying to re-establish contact, and the king stood alone in his shattered chamber, the data feeds all blank, his face pale with a fear he would never admit. "They're gone," one advisor whispered from behind the fractured door. The ship vanished again. Not destroyed, not cloaked, just gone. The child is still alive and growing faster than anything we've ever seen. The king turned slowly, his eyes hollow, his voice shaking with rage. "Do you understand what this means?" he said. "The bloodline has returned, not just in name but in truth, in power and fire, the same blood my ancestors, once buried under silence, has now become flame again, and this time it carries human will, human chaos. And we will not survive its birth." Up in orbit, the ship began to groan, metal creaking, systems flickering, and in the center of it all, Viren cried out as another wave struck her, stronger than the last, her voice echoing across the chamber, like thunder rippling through a cave of stars. Caleb gripped her hand tightly, offering what little strength he could, watching as her body began to rise slightly from the bed. Suspended by the energy now surrounding her, the child was coming, not through slow labor, but through a surge of light that tore through gravity and time, and when the final wave hit, the ship went silent for one long breath. Every light dimmed, every sound faded, and for a single heartbeat, the universe seemed to stop. Then the child was born. The light erupted through the chamber, blinding and beautiful, golden and silver and alive. Every screen exploded in sparks, every panel bent outward, and the ship shook as if caught in the grip of a supernova. Viren fell back into Caleb's arms, her body glowing with the last remnants of power. And in her arms, wrapped in warmth and starlight, was a child unlike anything that had ever existed. The child opened its eyes, and they were not just eyes. They were galaxies trapped behind flesh. They shimmered with the reflection of stars no one had ever mapped. And as it breathed its first breath, the ship stabilized, the damage reversed. The walls sealed, and every broken system came back to life with renewed force. Caleb held them both, speechless, his heart pounding as the readings on his scanner surged back online. The child's vitals were perfect, not just healthy, but extraordinary. Its body humming with balanced energy, its brain activity spreading across frequencies never recorded before, and most shocking of all, the scanner labeled the baby with a tag it had never used. Hybrid class. Singular. Viren slowly opened her eyes, her face pale but calm, her gaze locked onto her child. And she whispered softly, "You are the one they feared, the one they tried to erase. But now you're here, and nothing can stop what comes next." The child reached one tiny hand upward, and the lights in the ship responded, pulsing gently, echoing its heartbeat. And Caleb knew then that this child did not just carry power. It was power. It was the union of forgotten blood and forbidden's will. It was the key and the spark and the storm to come. Down on the surface, every sensor across the Empire lit up at once, warning of a new anomaly. A pulse felt not through tech but through instinct. Priests collapsed in temples, oracles screamed with voices not their own. Stars shifted slightly off course for one breath before returning, and animals howled beneath the twin moons in fear and worship. In the tower, the king stared out across the silent horizon, and for the first time in his rule, he felt small, not from defeat, but from the presence of something greater than rule. Greater than law, greater than him. A child had been born beyond his reach, beyond his command, and he knew that from this moment on, the throne of Radari was no longer his to control. In the cradle of stars, aboard a ship powered by forgotten light, the child rested between its mother and father, unaware yet of the wars it had ended and the future it had begun. But its eyes blinked slowly, peacefully, and every time they opened, the stars blinked back, as if the universe itself had taken notice of its arrival. And in that silence, wrapped in starlight, the air of fire and silence dreamed its first dream, and the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what that dream would become. The stars outside the ship burned brighter than before, as if drawn to the heartbeat of the newborn resting in Viren's arms. Every constellation seemed to shift slightly in their patterns, their alignments responding to something they could not explain, but could no longer ignore. The universe had changed in silence and light, not with war, not with weapons, but with the first breath of a child born from a forbidden's union. Viren sat quietly on the edge of the control platform, her back against the curved metal wall. The child nestled close to her chest, its small body glowing faintly with that same gold and silver pulse that now hummed through the ship's systems. And across from her, Caleb watched with eyes wide open, his hands shaking not from fear, but from awe, from the weight of what they had just witnessed and the future that now stretched out in front of them. "This ship," he whispered, his voice almost afraid to disturb the peace. "It's running better than it ever did before. Every system's running above optimal. It's like the child is powering it somehow, not just fixing it, but improving it. Like the vessel itself is responding to their presence." Viren nodded slowly, her fingers brushing over the soft hair of the infant, her thoughts racing through memory and prophecy. My mother told me once that the moon bloodline was never meant to die. It was meant to wait, to hide until the moment came when it would no longer be feared, but followed. Her voice grew quiet. She said one day a child would be born who would carry both the stars and the earth in their veins, and the galaxy would choose to follow or burn. Caleb looked down at the readings, then back to the child. That child is here now, and every system from orbit to the surface knows it, he said. The palace sensors, the planetary grids, even the outer colonies are showing signs of energy flux. The child's presence is sending ripples across the communication spectrum. They can't hide anymore, no matter how far we run. Far below them, on the surface of Radari, the capital was in chaos. The king's orders had turned from silence to panic. Every ship that could fly had been launched in search of the stolen heir. Every advisor was shouting conflicting strategies, but the people no longer moved in fear. They had felt the pulse, they had seen the signs, and whispers had begun to spread like wildfire through the streets. Whispers of the forgotten line, of the child of light and fire, of the princes once cast aside, and the human who had changed the fate of their blood. Some said the child would bring the return of the starlit era. Others believed it would bring ruin to the throne. But all of them knew one truth beyond denial. The child had been born, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the hidden chambers of the royal temple, old priests stood before the scrolls they had once been ordered to seal, ancient prophecies. Now glowing with light not seen in centuries, words reappeared in ink that had faded to dust, and every line pointed to the same event, the same moment, the same being, the one who would rewrite the stars. Back aboard the ship, the child stirred softly, its tiny hand curling into the fabric of Virene's robe, and the pulse it gave off grew brighter. Every monitor responded, systems adjusting automatically as if listening to the rhythm of the child's energy. And outside the ship, light bent in strange ways, forming a trail of glimmering fragments like a path across the void. Caleb stepped forward, watching as a new navigation route formed on the screen. A path no pilot had ever charted. It stretched beyond known systems, across ancient starfields lost to history, and at its end was a single point marked in the old language of the Moonblood Queens, a place known only in myths and broken starlore. Kilaris, the cradle of origin. Virene looked at the name, her voice catching in her throat. It's where the line began, she said. The place my blood was first born. The first queen of starlight built her sanctuary there before she vanished from time. And now the child is calling us back to that place, as if it remembers what was lost. Caleb nodded, hands moving across the console, aligning the ship to follow the path. Then we go there, he said. We follow the stars the child has drawn for us, because whatever is waiting at the end, it's where the truth begins, not just about the child, but about everything we thought we knew about this galaxy. Outside, the ship began to move, its engines glowing brighter than ever, not with combustion or fuel, but with living energy, the golden fire of the child's birth fueling its journey. And behind them, the world of Radari shrank into the distance, its towers dim under the weight of their fading rule, its people now looking upward, not with obedience, but with hope and fear and wonder. The king stood on the high balcony, robes whipping in the wind, watching the light trail arc across the sky like a comet born from prophecy. His eyes burned with rage, his mouth a thin line of defeat. But deep inside he knew the throne was no longer his, because power no longer lived in crowns or walls. It now lived in blood and stars, and the cry of a newborn, born beyond law. As the ship crossed into deep space, Silence fell again, not the silence of fear, but of destiny forming itself moment by moment, and Viren rested her head against the metal wall, the child in her arms peaceful, its light soft and steady, and she whispered softly into the silence, "You are not just our child. You are a bridge between what was and what must be, and no force in this galaxy can unmake what you have become." Caleb sat beside them, eyes fixed on the stars ahead, his hand resting gently on Viren's shoulder, and together they watched as the void opened before them like a path carved by fate itself, the galaxy holding its breath for the child who would either rebuild its future or burn away its past. And in the quiet hum of the ship's heart, the child dreamed again, not of safety or fear, but of stars folding open like pages, of voices calling from systems unlit, of old thrones shattering beneath truth, and above it all, a voice so ancient it made time itself tremble, whispering gently into the soul of the newborn, "It begins with you."